The sun dipped low over the rolling plains, casting long shadows across the village nestled at the edge of the vast wilderness. Among the quiet murmurs of daily life, a sudden tension hung in the air, unsettling the calm that had always defined this place. At the heart of the village, Chief Tamaka sat stern and silent, his gaze fixed on the ground before him. The council had gathered in urgent secrecy the day before, and today, the consequences of their decision were about to unfold. His daughter, Ayana, stood nearby, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her dark eyes flickered with a mixture of defiance and fear. Ayana was no stranger to the traditions of her people, raised with stories of honor, strength, and duty. But this moment was unlike any other. The chief's voice, when it finally came, was heavy and unyielding. "You have brought shame to our village," he said quietly, yet with an authority that brooked no argument. "Your actions cannot be overlooked." Ayana's heart pounded. She knew exactly what her father meant. Just days before, she had defied the elders by sneaking out to meet with settlers beyond the river, a dangerous act forbidden by custom. Her curiosity about the outside world, her desire to understand those beyond her people's borders, had led her into trouble. "I only wanted to learn," she whispered, voice trembling, "to see what lies beyond our land." "But it is not your place," the chief replied, his eyes now meeting hers, cold and resolute. "The peace we maintain is fragile. Your recklessness threatens it." Murmurs spread through the gathered crowd. The villagers watched with solemn faces, understanding the weight of the chief's decision. "As punishment, you will marry one from the settlers' land, a cowboy named Cole Bennett," he declared. "This union will serve as a bridge between our worlds, a lesson in respect and consequence." Ayana's breath caught. The name was unfamiliar, but the idea was overwhelming. To be married as a punishment? To someone she had never met. The thought filled her with dread and anger. "No," she said firmly, "I will not marry him. You cannot force me." The chief's expression hardened. "This is not a choice. It is a duty. For your actions, for the future of our people, you will accept this path." That night, as the village slept under a blanket of stars, Ayana wrestled with her fate. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices of ancestors and memories of freedom. How could she accept this? How could she marry a stranger and live with the consequences of a decision she never made? Days later, a rider arrived, a man clothed in worn leather, his face weathered by sun and wind. He was Cole Bennett, the cowboy chosen to be her husband. The villagers watched silently as he dismounted, his calm demeanor contrasting with the tension that filled the air. Cole's eyes met Ayana's briefly a moment, charged with unspoken questions. Neither knew what lay ahead, but both understood the gravity of this union. In the days that followed, Ayana and Cole were bound by custom and circumstance. The ceremony was simple but solemn. The village watched as the chief's daughter and the cowboy were joined in marriage, a symbol of consequence and hope. But beneath the surface of punishment and obligation, a quiet tension stirred, a possibility neither could yet name. Ayana stared at the horizon, the vast plains stretching endlessly before her. Her world had shifted in an instant, and the path ahead was uncertain. Yet, deep inside, a flicker of something unexpected began to grow, a curiosity about the man she had been forced to marry, and the life that awaited them both. As the sun rose on their first morning together, Ayana steeled herself. Whatever came next, she would face it head, for herself, for her people, and for a future that was still unwritten. Cole Bennett rode into the village with the steady gait of a man accustomed to long days under the sun and nights spent beneath the stars. The dust clung to his boots, the worn leather of his jacket creaked softly as he dismounted, and the weight of unfamiliar eyes settled on him like a heavy cloak. He was a cowboy by trade, raised on open ranges far to the east, where cattle and horses defined the rhythm of life. But today, he found himself in a world unlike any he had known before. His first impression of the village was one of quiet strength and deep-rooted tradition. The people moved with a purpose, their eyes sharp and wary. The chief, a tall man with weathered skin and piercing eyes, had made it clear, Cole's presence here was no mere visit. He was to marry Ayana, the chief's daughter, as a consequence for her defiance. It was a union that felt forced, a duty neither man nor woman had sought. Cole was no stranger to hardship or responsibility. He had grown up learning the hard lessons of life on the range, long hours, tough choices, and the ever-present risk of loss. But this was something entirely different. He wasn't marrying for love or companionship. He was marrying because it was demanded, because it was expected. And yet, beneath the surface of duty, there was a flicker of something else, a quiet hope that perhaps, in this unexpected turn, there might be more than punishment. The first time Cole saw Ayana up close, she was standing near the edge of the village, her dark eyes fixed on the distant horizon. There was a fierceness in her gaze, tempered by a vulnerability that caught him off guard. She didn't speak to him then, and neither did he. Words felt inadequate in that moment, swallowed by the vast silence between their worlds. In the days before their ceremony, Cole observed the rhythm of village life though careful respect between the people. The stories passed in whispers, the weight of history in every gesture. It was a culture rich and alive, but one that seemed cautious of him, the outsider. He sensed the unspoken judgments, the suspicion that lingered like smoke. Yet, he also saw glimpses of warmth. A young child laughed as she chased a chicken. The elders shared stories by the fire, and Ayanna herself moved through her world with a quiet grace that intrigued him. She was not like the women he had known back home. She carried the strength of her people in her posture, the fire of defiance in her eyes, and a silent question that seemed to echo his own. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Cole found himself near the river that bordered the village. The water flowed steadily, a symbol of life and change. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find there, but the solitude was a welcome respite from the watchful eyes of the villagers. Ayanna appeared quietly beside him, startling him at first. She said nothing, just stood there, her gaze following the water's course. After a long pause, Cole finally spoke. "I don't want this to be just a punishment," he said, his voice low and steady. "I want to understand why I'm here, why this matters." Ayanna looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. "You're here because my father sees this marriage as a way to teach me a lesson," she said softly. "But maybe it can be more than that." Cole nodded slowly. "I want to believe that too." In that quiet moment, a fragile connection began to form, one born not of obligation, but of a shared desire to find something real amidst the uncertainty. The days passed, and Cole learned more about Ayanna's world. He listened to the stories of her people, the legends of their ancestors, and the customs that shaped their lives. He shared tales of the open plains, of long rides and campfires under endless skies. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble, replaced by a tentative understanding. Yet, the path ahead was far from easy. Both knew that their marriage was not merely a union of two people, but a bridge between worlds, one fraught with history, pride, and unspoken fears. As the sun set on their first week together, Cole stood beside Ayanna once more. The road ahead was uncertain, but something within him had changed. He no longer saw this marriage as a punishment to endure, but as a chance to build something unexpected, a connection that might just change everything. The morning of the ceremony dawned crisp and clear, the sky painted with soft hues of pink and gold. The village stirred early, the usual quiet replaced by a charged energy. This was the day when two worlds would be bound together, not by choice, but by necessity. Ayanna stood outside her family's lodge, the cool breeze tugging gently at her dark hair. Her heart raced as she waited, nerves and defiance swirling inside her. She knew the significance of the moment, and though she longed to resist, the weight of her father's decision pressed heavily on her. Cole approached steadily, his boots crunching softly on the earth. Today, he was no longer just a cowboy or an outsider. He was to be her husband, bound by the customs that had dictated their fates. Their eyes met for the first time in daylight, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ayanna's gaze was sharp, guarded. She studied him, the worn jacket, the steady posture, the eyes that held a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. Cole met her stare evenly, recognizing the strength beneath her surface. Neither spoke at first. Words felt too heavy, too loaded with expectation. The ceremony was simple, rooted in the traditions of Ayanna's people. The elders spoke blessings over them, prayers weaving through the morning air like a gentle wind. Family and villagers watched silently, the collective weight of history pressing down. As the last words were spoken, and the bonds were symbolically tied, Ayanna and Cole were left standing together to strangers, bound by a fate neither had chosen. The first moments alone were awkward, filled with silence that spoke volumes. Ayanna finally broke the quiet. "This isn't what I wanted," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I don't know if I can do this." Cole nodded slowly. "Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out." There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope or perhaps curiosity. For all the anger and fear, she was willing to listen. They began to walk through the village, side by side but with a careful distance. The villagers watched them, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Cole asked about the land, the customs, the people. Ayanna answered cautiously, revealing just enough to bridge the gap without giving away too much. With each step, the tension between them eased, replaced by a tentative connection. They were both trapped by circumstance, but perhaps not entirely powerless. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Cole offered a small smile. "You're stronger than I thought." Ayanna looked at him sharply. "That's not a compliment." He chuckled softly. "It's meant to be." They laughed, a brief, genuine sound that startled them both. In that moment, the walls began to crumble. As the day wore on, they shared stories carefully, cautiously. Cole spoke of the open plains, of the freedom found in endless skies and the bond between a man and his horse. Ayanna spoke of her people's deep connection to the land, of traditions passed down through generations. Though their worlds were different, they found unexpected common ground: respect for the earth, a fierce loyalty to family, and a desire for something more than what their circumstances had handed them. By evening, the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the village. Ayanna and Cole stood near the riverbank, the water reflecting the colors of the sky. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," Ayanna admitted softly, "but maybe this isn't the end." Cole nodded, his gaze steady. "It's only the beginning." As the first stars appeared, shining like distant promises, two strangers once forced together began to imagine a future where connection might grow from consequence. In the days that followed the ceremony, life for Ayanna and Cole settled into a rhythm, uneasy at first, like two dancers out of step, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to move in sync. Their shared home was modest, built near the edge of the village, close enough to be within reach of her people, yet far enough to grant them some privacy. It was a neutral space, neither fully hers nor his. They slept on opposite sides of the fire pit that warmed their small dwelling, a silent agreement between them that though they were married, they were still learning what that meant. Ayanna spent her mornings helping her mother and the other women prepare herbs, weave baskets, and tend to the communal gardens. She had always found comfort in routine, but now, there was a shift: curious glances from her friends, whispers when she passed. Some pitied her, others envied the boldness of what she had done. No one truly understood. Meanwhile, Cole made himself useful where he could. He offered to repair fences, carry supplies, even help tend to the horses. At first, many villagers were wary he was an outsider, a man of a different world. But he didn't complain, didn't force his presence. He just worked, quiet and steady. What surprised Ayanna most was how much he listened. He asked about her customs, not just to be polite, but because he genuinely wanted to know. Why the women painted their faces with ash during mourning. Why her people only hunted what they needed. Why fire circles were sacred. He asked, and then he listened, never interrupting, never mocking. One evening, she sat beside him near the fire. A light breeze stirred the air, and the scent of pine drifted in from the forest. "My people say, stories live in the flames," she said, watching the fire crackle. Cole looked at her, interested. "What kind of stories?" She hesitated, then began. "When I was little, my grandmother told me about the great hawk spirit who guards the sky. He watches over those who lose their way and guides them back. He doesn't speak, but his wings are loud, like thunder." Cole leaned back slightly, smiling. "Sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "You can't meet him," she said. "Only those who listen can see him." He was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll keep listening." That simple sentence struck her more deeply than she expected. In return, she listened to him, too. Cole spoke sparingly about his past, but over time, the walls lowered. He told her about his father, who died when he was just a boy, and how his mother had worked tirelessly to raise him and his younger sister. He told her about cattle drives that stretched for days and the eerie quiet of the prairie at night, when only the coyotes dared to sing. Ayanna began to see beyond the rugged exterior and the unfamiliar accent. He wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man shaped by hardship and humility, by a code of survival that mirrored her own in unexpected ways. One afternoon, they worked side by side gathering firewood. Ayanna noticed how careful Cole was with the earth. He never took more than they needed, always replacing stones or sticks left behind. "You're different than I thought," she said quietly. "How'd you think I'd be?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Louder, angrier. Like the others I've heard stories about." He shrugged. "I'm not like most folks back home either." That night, as they sat near the fire again, their silences grew more comfortable. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but of people beginning to understand each other. For the first time, Ayanna let herself imagine a future where she wasn't just enduring this life but perhaps choosing it. And Cole, for all his calm and restraint, began to realize that this village, these people, this woman might offer something he hadn't known he was looking for. Still, Under the surface of their growing connection, tension brewed. The chief watched carefully, and not everyone in the village welcomed the slow blooming of something that resembled peace. They were walking a fine line between two cultures, two expectations, and the fragile hope of something new. But for now, that hope was enough. Autumn crept in slowly, tinting the trees with golden fire. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and smoke, and the once bustling village began its quiet preparations for winter. In the midst of it all, Ayanna and Cole found themselves adjusting, not just to life together, but to something deeper and harder to name. They no longer avoided each other. Their conversations were fuller, less guarded. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust, and that was something worth building on. One morning, Cole rose early to check on the village's horses. Over the past few weeks, he had become the go-to man for tending to the animals. He had a way with them, gentle, patient. Even the most skittish colt responded to his voice. Ayanna watched him from a distance. Leaning against a tree with her arms crossed, she had spent her whole life around proud warriors and skilled trackers, men who carried their strength on their shoulders. But Cole was different. He didn't need to prove anything. His strength was quiet, felt in his steadiness, not his volume. Later that day, she approached him with an unexpected request. "I want you to teach me to ride," she said, meeting his surprised gaze. "You've never ridden before?" he asked, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Only bareback, and never far," she admitted, "but I want to learn. Properly, like you do it." He grinned, a flicker of something playful lighting up his face. "All right then, tomorrow morning. Be ready." And so began a new rhythm. At sunrise, they met in the open clearing beyond the village. Cole brought to horses his own buckskin gelding, Dusty, and a calm mare for Ayanna. He showed her how to saddle and bridle the horse, how to hold the reins, how to sit tall and centered. At first she struggled. Her balance wavered. She clenched the reins too tightly, spoke too harshly. But Cole never lost his patience. He corrected her gently, with a hand on her arm or a soft word in her ear. "You don't control a horse by fear," he told her. "You guide it by trust." Those words stayed with her. Each morning, she improved. Her posture straightened. Her hands steadied. She began to ride with confidence, and soon, they were galloping across the open field together, wind rushing past them like laughter. After their rides, they sat under a tall cedar, sharing dried berries or smoked meat and talking about the day ahead. Ayanna found herself looking forward to those moments, the way Cole laughed, the way he asked about her dreams and truly listened. "I always thought I'd lead one day," she said once. "Be a voice for our people, maybe even sit beside my father as an elder." "You still could," Cole said. "Being married doesn't change what you're made of." Ayanna looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. In that moment, she saw no trace of the man she had feared being forced to marry. Instead, she saw someone who believed in her, perhaps more than she believed in herself. Their respect deepened through shared work too. When a sudden storm damaged one of the community storage lodges, Cole worked alongside the men of the village for 3 days straight. He took orders without protest, carried heavy beams on his shoulders, and earned silent nods from those who had once looked at him with suspicion. Later, one of the elders approached Ayanna quietly. "He may have come from another world, but he carries our values well." The words stirred something inside her, a growing awareness that Cole wasn't just adapting to her people's way of life. He was embracing it, and in doing so, he was becoming someone she could not just respect, but admire. That night, by the fire, she sat closer than usual. Their hands brushed as she passed him a cup of warm broth, and for a brief second, neither pulled away. Cole looked at her, a question in his eyes, but he didn't speak it. Instead, she said, "Thank you, for being kind, for not pushing me." He nodded. "I told you, I didn't come here to take anything. I came to learn." And learn he had, but so had she. They were no longer strangers bound by duty. They were two people, slowly, carefully, choosing to walk side by side, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Winter was coming, but the cold didn't seem quite as sharp now, not with the warmth quietly growing between them. Ready to continue with part 6, The Unexpected Connection. "You said yes," ChatGPT said. "Great. Here's part 6. The Unexpected Connection. Approximately 700 words. Part 6. The unexpected connection. Snow arrived early that year. The first flakes drifted down like feathers, gentle and silent, blanketing the village in white. Fires burned brighter, meals stretched longer, and people gathered close inside their homes, clinging to warmth and familiar company. For Ayanna and Cole, the change in season brought more than just cold winds and shortened days. It brought time, quiet, Uninterrupted time to reflect, to speak, to feel. They shared their meals now, not because they were expected to, but because it felt natural. Ayanna would cook thick stews with herbs she'd gathered in the fall, and Cole would hunt or trade with nearby settlers for flour and salt. They worked as a team, not as punishment, not as obligation, but as partners. And still, there was something more. A tension not born of conflict, but of closeness. Ayanna felt it when he passed behind her to stoke the fire, when his hand brushed her shoulder. Cole felt it in her gaze across the dinner table, in the curve of her smile that now came more freely. One evening, a storm trapped them inside for hours. Snow piled against the door, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. They sat near the fire, shoulders nearly touching, both staring into the flames. I never expected this, Ayanna said quietly. This marriage, Cole asked. This peace, she replied. This comfort, with you. Cole didn't answer right away. He turned to look at her, and for once, she didn't look away. I didn't come here looking for it either, he said, but it found us. Somehow. Their eyes held longer than usual. The space between them shrank not through words, but through the shared understanding of what had been building quietly, patiently, over weeks of learning and listening. Cole reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her like that, not a brush of fingers while passing a cup, not a steadying hand during a ride. This was deliberate, gentle, asking. Ayanna didn't pull away. I used to think I'd never feel anything for a man I didn't choose, she said softly, voice nearly lost in the crackle of the fire. But now I don't know if I would have chosen anyone else. Cole's thumb moved lightly over her knuckles. You were never just given to me, he said, not in any way that mattered. If this is something real, it's because you allowed it to be. The wind raged outside, but in the small warmth of their home, the air was still. Later that night, they lay side by side, not out of tradition. Not because the village expected it, but because they wanted to. The fire burned low, but neither felt the cold. In the days that followed, something shifted between them. It wasn't just respect now, it was affection. It was laughter that came easier, eyes that lingered longer, moments that felt full, even without words. The village began to notice. There was a difference in how they moved together, how they worked, how they spoke. Ayanna's mother smiled quietly one morning as she saw her daughter lean into Cole's side, laughing at some private joke. Even Chief Tamaka, who had kept his distance since the wedding, watched them with a thoughtful, unreadable expression. But with new closeness came new questions. Ayanna still wondered what her future would look like if she could still be a voice for her people, while loving a man from another world. Cole, too, wondered how long he could remain in a place where he'd always be an outsider to some. One afternoon, as they walked along the frozen edge of the river, Ayanna turned to him. Would you ever leave this place? She asked. He stopped walking, surprised. Why? Because I think I'd follow you, if you asked me. Cole looked at her, his breath visible in the cold air. And if I asked you to stay, I already have, she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of promises, of dreams that had once seemed impossible. They didn't know what challenges still lay ahead, whether her father would fully accept the man she now loved, or whether the world beyond the village would ever accept them as a pair. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What had started as a punishment had become a bond forged not in fire or ceremony, but in choice. The unexpected connection between them was no longer unexpected. It was real, and it was growing stronger every day. Winter held the village in its frozen grip for many more weeks. But inside Ayanna and Cole's small home, the air was filled with warmth of the fire, of quiet conversation, of something deeper that neither had expected but both had come to embrace. They had moved from strangers, bound by obligation, to companions sharing a life. Still, love, true, grounded love, was not something spoken easily between them. It had grown slowly, layer by layer, out of shared work, mutual respect, and an understanding born of effort, not accident. But as the snow began to melt and the river cracked with the sounds of spring's approach, the reality they'd been sheltering from returned. They were still two people from very different worlds, and not everyone had forgotten that it came to a head during the spring council. Ayanna sat beside her father, as she had since she was young. The village elders had gathered to discuss trade routes, land concerns, and the strengthening of relations with settlers. It was routine until one of the elders, a proud and traditionally minded man named Wek, spoke with pointed concern. The girl speaks of unity now, Wikopa said, not looking at her directly. But what happens when the cowboy chooses to return to his people, when the first storm of difference rises and they forget what brought them together? Ayanna tensed, but her father raised a hand before she could respond. And if he stays? The chief asked, voice quiet but firm. Wickopa hesitated. Then he should speak for himself. The room fell silent. Cole, who had been seated respectfully at the edge of the circle as a guest, stood. He didn't speak quickly. He never did. Instead, he looked each elder in the eye before his voice cut through the quiet. I came here because it was asked of me. At first, it felt like punishment to you, maybe to her, and to me, too. But I stayed because I learned this place holds more truth than anywhere I've ever known. And I stayed because of her. He turned slightly, meeting Ayana's gaze. I don't need to return to where I came from. I've found something better here. If you'll let me, I want to belong. I want to build something lasting with her. And with all of you. There was a long pause. Then, to everyone's surprise, Chief Tamakas spoke not as a father, but as a leader. Belonging isn't given, it's earned. And you've begun to earn it. Later that night, Ayana and Cole stood at the riverbank again. The ice now fully broken. The current alive with motion. You could have walked away, Ayana said, her fingers entwined with his. I thought about it, Cole admitted, but then I realized, there's nothing out there for me anymore. Not like this, not like you. She smiled, leaning into him. My people will always remember how this began, but maybe one day, they'll remember more how it turned out. He nodded. And maybe one day, our children won't be seen as one or the other, just as both. It was the first time they'd spoken of a future so openly, and the idea, rather than frightening her, filled Ayana with a calm she hadn't known before. By the end of spring, the shift was undeniable. Cole had built trust not just with her, but with others trading fairly, respecting the land, honoring the customs without mockery or dismissal. Children began to follow him around the village, eager to hear his stories. Elders nodded to him in passing. Even Wickopa no longer turned away when they crossed paths. Ayana too changed. She stood taller in council, spoke more clearly, and no longer carried the weight of defiance but of purpose. Her voice was not just tolerated, it was sought. Together, they became something new, not a symbol of punishment, but of possibility. One late summer evening, they returned to the fire circle where their journey had begun. No audience, no ceremony, just the two of them. I never thanked you, she said, as they sat under the stars. For what? For never trying to be someone else. You just showed up and stayed. He chuckled softly. You wouldn't have let me be anyone else anyway. She smiled. No, I wouldn't have. As the fire crackled between them and the stars scattered across the night sky, Ayana and Cole knew their story hadn't ended with punishment. It had only begun with it now. It was a story of understanding, of two people who crossed a divide and chose every day to keep building the bridge together.